roundtable, very special guests, and we've got some great things we want to talk about. Which there's been a lot of talk about changes, in the way we recruit, the way we retain. We hear about the great reshuffling, the great resignation, and that sort of thing. And so, with all that, that has actually added to some of the problems that already existed in HR. And so I've got a great leader to talk about how we can navigate through some of those changes. But while we're here, we're also here to be able to give any kind of advice or feedback. If you're looking to move into leadership at that next level in your career, we're also here for that. He certainly is a great person to talk to about that. So without further ado, I want to welcome and appreciate our guest today, Mr. Jeremy Sadler. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Great to be here. Happy to have a nice conversation on this Thursday afternoon.
Awesome. Yes, I'm excited too. And I'm bringing up your information here on my screen so folks can see it quite clearly. If you'll see here that Jeremy, he is the executive director of the American Society for Healthcare Human Resource Administration. And along with his role, he didn't just start doing this yesterday, right? He's been in the HR space for a very long time. So he's very qualified with this role. You look at some of his background. He's also been with the American Hospital Association as the executive director, as well as advocate of oral health. Just a very rich and storied background within healthcare HR. That's what I'm really excited about having him on the show. And I'm going to get a chance to see Jeremy in person here in just a few weeks. Looking forward to that. It's my first in-person event that I've gone to like this since the pandemic.
Yeah, we're super excited to have you. Super excited.
Definitely excited to be there as well. And we'll be talking more about that, guys. If you have any questions, maybe we can even talk about what is kind of some common threads of do's and don'ts when it comes to networking events. Even if you're not necessarily in healthcare, perhaps some of the things we can talk about will resonate with you even on that side. So to kind of get us started, Jeremy, if you would, kind of let us know, what are some of the things that you've observed, because you've got your feet on the ground, you've got your ears to the ground, you're able to hear and see a lot of things from a national perspective as far as what's been shifting in HR, and why you feel so passionately about the fact that more courage and leadership is needed in HR.
Yeah, so there certainly are a ton of changes. And, obviously there's a number of market changes. The fact that the economy is booming, the fact that jobs are plentiful, it makes it tougher to recruit. It makes it tougher to compete with businesses in your same function. And, frankly, it makes it tougher to compete across different industries. I mean, it's tough enough when you're fighting for great candidates within your industry. But when the job market is so open and everybody is clamoring for talent, it's even tougher when people can say, hey, you know what, I may have spent my entire career in healthcare, but I'm going to move to manufacturing because they need me just as much as healthcare does. So, obviously there's all of the different recruitment related difficulties, I think that everybody's having. And obviously organizations like yours are certainly helping fix and at least ease some of the pain that some institutions are having. But obviously that is that's the biggest sort of acute focus right now, is just getting people back into your workforce when somebody else leaves. That backfill is tougher than it's been in probably decades, just because the job market is so incredibly good for those candidates. But obviously when you think about trying to recruit somebody back into the workforce or into your workforce, from another organization, or somebody that's coming back into the workforce from being laid off or struggling through COVID, there are a lot of folks, to be quite honest, that are that have made decisions to say, I'm not going to go back into a job that beats me up. I'm not going to go back into a job that's so incredibly rigid that I don't have any family time. I'm not going to go back into a job that makes me unhappy. And when you start to think, people that are desperate, obviously they're willing to take a job and collect a paycheck and, start getting their bills paid and so on. But those candidates that have been working through the pandemic, and those candidates that have made decisions during the pandemic, particularly in healthcare, to say, you know what, I'm getting out of this environment temporarily because I don't feel like it's safe or it's healthy or it's good for my mental health. those folks are even more difficult than to bring back into your workforce if you're going back to the same routine and the same expectations and the same difficulties
Right.
that existed before the pandemic. People are not going to return to the office as readily and willing as they have in the past. So there's no doubt that the progressive organizations that were already allowing folks to work from home occasionally are now looking and saying, hey, maybe this becomes a more permanent workforce strategy. Those organizations that have been reluctant to allow people to work from home at all, that then were thrust into it, are looking at it and saying, hey, I better have some flexibility because my competition who let somebody work a day from home now let somebody have a completely flexible work schedule. I'd better than at least allow that day or two of work from home, or I'm never going to pull candidates back into the workforce.
Those are great points. I kind of just touch base on something that you said earlier. I think is very key, that sometimes healthcare leaders don't think about as much. Is there's a lot of roles within the organization that don't involve direct patient care, and in those cases, you're competing against other industries. And so, like you said earlier, these guys in the industrial space, they need me too, right? So we need them in healthcare, but these other folks need me as well. And so that's where we're competing against more than ever, because there are so many positions outside of direct patient care that other industries, other folks are pulling from those same candidates. So I love that you mentioned that point. We've got to start thinking more about that.
Yeah, there's absolute competition. When you think about IT, you think about human resources, you think about those back office business folks, you think about your accounting and your finance teams. You think about your business development strategy folks. These are all professionals that right now, the job market is hot and there are lots of opportunities, way more opportunities than there are people that are looking and, currently on the sidelines. So, the idea that you have to have a leg up, or at the very least, you got to be competitive from a work-life balance and a work-life expectation perspective of your peer group and other industries, or you're going to sit with openings that inevitably are going to be open for far longer. Your time to fill is going to be incredibly high, and it's likely that you're going to end up pulling maybe from a lower quality of candidate, because at some point you're going to get desperate. At some point you're going to say, hey, I just need to fill this role, and I'm not pulling any of the top tier talent, because those top tier talent are looking for that work-life balance, looking for that opportunity to do something challenging and stimulating in an environment that also respects the fact that they've got a life outside of work.
Absolutely. Eric Caravello, he says, wonderful. I'd like to connect with you. I'm currently looking for an HR director in the healthcare space. Please reach out. So any of you are watching, I hope you see Eric's message. We believe in a rising tide lifts all boats. And, not that it's meant to be a recruiting space, but at least he'll probably meet a lot of HR directors actually at the upcoming conference here coming up in a few weeks for the ASHA.
Eric, I don't know if you're coming to the ASHA event, but if you're not, I would certainly encourage you to do that. Our attendance tends to be about 70% managers, directors, VPs, CHROs in the healthcare space. So, all in HR. So, if you're not coming to the event, I'd suggest you get there, because you'll be able to rub elbows with, 200, 300, 400 candidates.
Yeah. That's true. That's a good point. Okay, so going back to what we talked about earlier, and I think this is so key. Okay, here's where I think this is one thing that I'm thinking that I would want to have some courage for. Okay, is if I'm in a situation where I'm at the C-suite and we've got a CEO who's very passionate for whatever reason about everybody coming back to the office. Okay, knowing that there's a lot of positions that are either going to go unfilled, or they're going to just be, like you said, it's going to be the entry level or just not top candidates, because they're being offered other things that do give more work from home options. Or we could paint a scenario of an HR director that's working with a hiring manager that feels like the candidates should work from the office, exclusively or perhaps mostly, whereas a lot of the candidates are being offered other positions that aren't work from or aren't in the office. So can you speak to that, so we can kind of delve into what are some things you would suggest? How would you frame the conversation in those two instances?
Yeah, well, I'll start with this. If you're at the point where you're recruiting, you've already lost some talent. So the first thing I would do, before I'm even in that recruitment space, is I'd make sure that my incumbent workforce and my incumbent staff is satisfied. Are they, are they high performers with high potential that I want to retain long term? Then, in reality, I probably ought to. All right, can't turn it all off. I probably ought to be working on them first and foremost. So if it means that flexibility needs to start with the current workforce before I get into the recruiting space, absolutely. When it comes to convincing senior executives, obviously executives' responsibility to an organization is to keep the organization moving forward, whether it's, on their mission, whether it's financially, whether it's, with future strategy. And I think you need to be able to make the case for why a work from home environment will bring you top tier talent, and why and how those top tier talent then can help you with your strategy, can help you with your mission, can help you with your finances. I think it's always beneficial to kind of have that cost benefit analysis out there. The organization that I came from before I went to work at the AHA and then ASHRA, Advocate Aurora Health, we spent a number of years, probably the last 10 years, filling a massive corporate building with system-based employees. And I mean, this was a 7-story tower. I'm not an expert in square footage, but it had to be hundreds of thousands of square feet in an expensive marketplace. That building is sitting empty right now. The good news for that organization now is once that contract expires on the space that's been rented, that's money back in the organization's pocket. So if you can allow, and you have the tools and systems and resources to allow people to have a work from home environment or work in a hoteling space environment, because not everybody's there, you're going to save a ton of money in real estate. You're going to save a ton of money in rent. And I'd be willing to bet if you have an engaged professional workforce, you are not going to lose much in the line of productivity. And anything you lose in productivity, you're likely to gain back in savings in the rental space, in the real estate space. And what I will absolutely say is study after study over the course of the pandemic has said professionals are working more at home than they are when they go to the office. There are fewer distractions at home. I mean, of course, you got your TV and you got your pet and you got your housework, but people tend to be working longer days because it's a little easier. Just leave that laptop open and answer that email, in your after hours. People are willing to kind of work through what normally would have been commute time and, stay on a little bit longer. And, those things are absolutely offsetting anything that organizations might have felt in, hey, we're going to lose productivity. We're not going to have a workforce that's quite as engaged. The issue then becomes, how do you ensure that people aren't burning out because they're working too much?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I just want to really give some extra confirmation what you just said about working more. Just anecdotally, when I am talking to just relatives and friends that used to exclusively work in an office, they're working like a typical 8 to 5 type schedule, 9 to 5 schedule, depending on how the lunch breaks work. And they get to the office, they do their work, they leave the office, and they're done. And so, and there's nothing wrong with that. But when I talk with them now, they're like, I really like this whole work from home issue because number one, I find myself, if I have to take a little time during the day, I'll work a little later in the evening. I have situations where that commute time, like what you mentioned, I'm working sometimes during that commute time. I'm wanting to get caught up on some things. Sometimes we're even doing some work even on the weekends because they want to, they chose to. And, a person, of course, like has to, like you said, have to make decisions on the work-life balance and the work-life fit issue. But in terms of fearing that we would lose productivity because they're working from home, I just absolutely don't see that. And I know in our company, I used to be one of those brick and mortar kind of people. If you got a real company, you have an office, you work in the office. You know,
Yep.
I was raised with that thinking because I'm still from that generation. But I could see when we went to a 60% before the pandemic and now to 100%, I can tell you that the productivity has not been an issue. In fact, if anything, it's gotten better.
Yeah, yeah, without question. There's a ton of benefit. That flexibility, I think, is incredibly important. It's important from a retention. It's important from a recruitment, and frankly, it's important because that flexibility that you give with professional staff is recognized, and it keeps people satisfied, and it keeps people engaged, and it keeps people realizing, hey, I don't have to miss a doctor's appointment. I'm not going to miss my child's graduation or a ball game because now I know that I've got that flexibility. I can start a little early, I can work a little late, I can get some work done after that ball game that I wouldn't have historically gotten done if I had to go back into the office and plug back into a desktop and so on. So, there's absolutely some significant benefit. I will tell you there's some challenges as well.
Yes,
obviously,
absolutely. Let's talk about those.
Space, the healthcare space is the vast majority of roles. The vast majority of the FTEs in the healthcare space are going to be in the clinical space. They're going to be,
right.
in the support service space. You got to be there. So it does create some challenges then for a workforce that is divided. Professional workforce that exempt and can kind of do the work from home thing, and those that have to be on campus. It does create a wedge issue that that those in-person workers can leverage. But I think savvy leaders, savvy human resource professionals, they're going to be able to find the way to navigate those waters. And I think there needs to be some consideration then for that workforce that has to be there on a campus or in a building to offer them greater flexibility than they've had in the past.
Yes, and I agree 100%.
I think about clinicians who have paperwork days, but that paperwork days always had to be, in the hospital. Why couldn't it be at home? I think about that nurse that's working 312s and hey, one of my normal 12s, I can't get in because, my son or daughter's got a dentist appointment in the morning. Hey, why can't we get some flexibility? Why can't we, they work an 8 that day and pick up another 4 hours at some other point during the work week, or use 4 hours of PTO a little bit easier. And, if you create that flexibility then for that workforce that has to be on campus, it makes it all the easier then for those professional staff that can work from home to do that without creating a lot of strife.
I love that. That is so key. So a couple of things that I just want to pull from what we've talked about so far. Noticing the changes in the environment or the market that's affecting the candidates that coming in. So if we're making that case to an executive or to a hiring manager, one of the things we should kind of go over, especially if it's an executive, is the cost benefit. I got that. You mentioned that. Another thing you mentioned is we're going to be able to get more top tier candidates and have a little bit more of a choice if we're able to have flexibility. But then there is a little bit of a drawback because we do, and I've seen this across healthcare organizations where, okay, we've got this culture of folks that go into the space because they're dealing with patient care. They have to be there. So you got that side of the folks working, and then you have this other side that's work from home. Well, now you've almost got like two different cultures going. I only want to have one culture, right? I want to have one environment. So how do we make sure that we're all on the same page? And so I know that is a concern that's come up, and I don't have any quick answers for that, but it is a definite drawback. And then also some people are feeling more isolated than before because of that. So I don't know if you want to speak to either of those points.
Yeah, I think the first point is incredibly difficult to manage. Obviously, like I said, offering some flexibility for those staff that have to be on a campus or have to be in your building is paramount. It's key. It's not easy, and it's not something that 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 you can do, frankly, with every position. I mean, I think about, I think about a healthcare organization where I was having a conversation with, with some of their HR team, and they had taken a fair amount of their professional staff and said work from home. And that included some of their leaders. And in some of their support areas, their leaders were working from home. And the message back then from some of their environmental service staff was, hey, what about us? How do we get to work from home? Obviously, it's an impossibility to get your environmental service staff who need to clean the hospital, keep patients safe, working from home. On the flip side, giving them some flexibility, giving them some control of their own schedule, giving them some ability to use their PTO instead of, having to be 6 months out and ask for a day, that will sort of ease the burden. I think in terms of helping to ease the burden when it comes to that professional staff that is working from home, is to make sure that you're not flaunting it. Particularly when there's a face-to-face engagement with the staff that has to be there. That's the day that person probably needs to be there in person. Using a background like this rather than a background from your lake house, while somebody else works incredibly hard. And that's, that's an example. That's from a hospital president, and I'm not gonna name names. I'm not gonna suggest what organization, but had a conversation with one of our members who said, we've had some staff that were a little agitated because there was a message that came from the hospital president thanking all of the workers that were there fighting COVID kind of early in the pandemic and risking their own health. And clearly he was at his summer home. Not the ideal message, not what you want to do. So obviously just managing perceptions is incredibly important. That's a message you do from your office and you deliver from your office, even if it's, I'm only there for the hour to record that message.
That is a really, I'm gonna make a clip out of that one. That was a really good one. And then I think too, one of the things that you kind of helped to jog in my head, I'm going to mention this to some HR leaders that I work with, is what can we do as perks for those who do have to go into the office, and having extra flexibility, like you said, on schedule. Maybe they even get a little extra PTO. I mean, if you can't pay them extra salary, maybe they get a little extra PTO because they do have consideration where some of the folks who they work with or had traditionally worked with in the hospital are no longer there. So I love the fact that, there's it's seen as a way to stay competitive, obviously in the environment, but to other employees who have to go into the office, it seems like a perk to them, even though in the marketplace, it's not necessarily a perk. Yep. So how do we make some perks inside the organization? Because we know in healthcare, you're going to have some staff that are there, along with some staff that are going to be offsite. How do you kind of manage that? So let me ask you this, what level or what role should the HR leader have in this conversation?
I think the HR team needs to be the spokesperson for it, along obviously with executives and leadership, to make the case that this isn't to slight anyone. This is because there is an organizational benefit, because it saves the organization resources. It keeps the organization safer, frankly. Obviously, those can be tough pills to swallow for those that still aren't being given that opportunity. But you mentioned, some additional PTO or some additional opportunities for time off. I think the one thing that, at least in the healthcare space, because reimbursement is so difficult in the healthcare reimbursement space, FTE budgets get tighter and tighter every single year. And part of the problem of what happens when you budget is, let's assume you got 10 shifts. You got 24 hours a day, people that work, you got 2 people on, obviously they're working 12-hour shifts. You need 2 people on every single day. If you are not budgeting all of the required shifts, plus all of the paid time off that you give to somebody, there is always going to be the idea in a leader's head, or the feeling for that leader to say, you know what, I feel like I should deny this PTO because I don't have anybody else to fill that slot.
Right.
And if you don't budget accordingly, if your organization gives somebody, 15% of their annual FTE budget is in the form of PTO, then when you build your FTE budget to cover all of the shifts, you need to bake in at least 15% into additional FTEs to cover the time off that you promise everyone. And I think too many organizations fail to do that, which then it becomes, hey, I just don't have anybody else to backfill. So sorry, nurse, you got to pick up that extra shift. Or sorry, environmental service tech, that we're holding you over because somebody else called in. And that is never the scenario that's going to turn out well. It's going to keep people, looking for other opportunities. It's going to frustrate them, and it's really going to make it difficult when that person misses their son or daughter's dentist appointment or graduation or doing their hair for prom, and then the professional staff have the ability and flexibility to do it without really even asking. So it's a matter of making sure that the time off that people are entitled to is given to them. And that comes really back to finance. It comes back to, when you budget on an annual basis, you've got to bake that in. And if your budget doesn't bake in all of the PTO, then you're making a mistake.
That's a great point. I never even thought about it from that perspective. Now, one thing I will add to what you just said is that, then of course, there's a cost to this, but there's a growing number of healthcare workers, especially as I think about RNs and other, front and center patient care type roles, that you've got these companies that are offering these staffing services where maybe you're able to bake in on a PRN basis or build some kind of pool, or if you have to work through a staffing agency, but just something that you bake that in. I've got some extra help, because if I'm already short staffed, instead of overworking my current staff, having some kind of resource that I can bring in on a periodic basis to help backfill some of those, at least those shifts, not necessarily positions, but shifts for those who are working there. Do you think that HR leaders should be giving some thought to, instead of just using it only when I absolutely have to actually bake it in their budget?
Yeah, I think they have to, but it's really difficult, particularly in healthcare, but in other industries as well. The other fear is, if I bake it in, people use all of it. And in the case of PTO versus vacation time, I may not always want everyone to use it every year. Yeah, there's a financial liability when I carry any of that over from one year into the next. But, sometimes that's time that is expected to supplement disability coverage, or, you got to use it before your disability kicks in, or you got to pay yourself, when you're using FML. So there are always challenges to the way that it's budgeted, and often that's coming from from your finance team, from your executive team. I think it requires conversations with them to say, look, in a market like we have right now, in a job market where we need to pull in talent, and the only way we can pull in that professional talent is by having this flexibility, in terms of where they work and when they work, and still the need then to keep our non-exempt staff or our caregivers or our support service staff happy. We need to change our methodology. We need to think more proactively, and in reality, it's something that probably existed a couple of decades ago when reimbursement was better. It was a little easier to have a more bloated FTE budget. But that bloat wasn't bloat because it looked good or felt good. It was there to cover, the beneficial expectations that you were setting. And that's what has eroded over the course of time. So you absolutely need to get your finance folks on board. And if the finance folks don't want to get on board with adding in that cushion that's needed, then I think you need to make sure you're having a conversation with those finance folks to say, okay, here's the cost of turnover.
Yeah, exactly.
When we turn somebody over, every time I turn somebody over in that department, I'm going to use 75% of an FTE in completely non-productive value in trying to give somebody back into that spot. So, would we rather give up a fraction of percentage on everybody, or 75% of an FTE on, on the positions that are easy to fill. Sometimes in healthcare, up to 1.5, times the cost of an FTE to bring somebody back in, the downtime, the training costs, all of that extra that goes into it. So, if you do a real good cost benefit analysis, your finance folks will generally get on board and
Yes.
kind of understand the perspective you're coming from.
And to your point, one of the things that sticks with me up until this day, a few years ago, Lori Knowles, she's the CHRO of Memorial Hermann here locally, and she gave a presentation at one of our conferences. And what she talked about was partnering with the financial person, partnering with the CFO, coming up with numbers together. So you can come up with those things like, what's the cost of turnover? What's the cost of losing this employee? What's the cost of bringing in, let's say it's a contingent staff to take the place of that person while they're out. And by partnering with them, now they're kind of part of the equation. It's not this push and pull back and forth on, well, this costs too much money. Well, that costs too much money, but how much does it cost compared to the other thing that happens if we don't, address this issue? So I love the idea too of partnering with your financial folks in your organization, coming up with a real cost benefit analysis on both sides. And let's get at this thing and come up with some better solutions. I see Benjamin's got some good comments here. I'm gonna address your comments. And those of you who are watching, we want to hear best practices. If you have seen anything on your end that's working, where it's moving the needle, we'd love to hear about it. Please pop it in the comments. If you have any questions, I've got a great person who's got a ton of experience that can help us. Benjamin says, not budgeting for time off is a problem I see all the time. Telling people they can't take their time off, which is part of their compensation, is never going to go well. He says managers who are encouraging their staff to not take earned time off are taking from their employees something this is as bad or worse than taking money out of their pockets. Wow, Benjamin, that's a pretty powerful statement. What are your thoughts on that, Jeremy?
Yeah, I'll be quite honest. I agree with 100% of it. If you are touting this as a benefit, if you are giving that time to somebody, particularly if you're, there are states obviously where you have every obligation when somebody leaves an organization to pay that time out, but there are places in this country you don't have to do that, and you see people stacking up and building PTO banks and time off banks that they never get to use and they don't get paid out. Absolutely 100%. It's like you're taking that money right out of their pocket. I think the other thing that is incredibly important to think about is if you're in a situation where you have to staff 24/7, 365, or you have to staff particular shifts and you don't have enough FTEs built into the budget where you're not tapping into somebody's time off or tapping into somebody's overtime just to cover the PTO that you want to give to somebody else, then you're doing them a disservice as well. Because the idea of, well, I'm gonna offer Jeremy his PTO, so I'm gonna be that leader that says, look, I understand PTO is important, so let me give that to Jeremy. But hey, Rollis, I need you to pick up that shift that I'm giving to Jeremy in the form of overtime, or give up a day off that you would normally have. That's not fair. That's right. No better than denying Jeremy, because now you're just putting more pressure on Rollis. So if you don't have a budget that allows Jeremy that time off, and somebody that's in a registry space, or just sort of inherently based on the fact that you've got additional FTEs to be able to fill that space, you're robbing from Peter to pay Paul, and that's never gonna be a good idea. It's never gonna play out well for those staff who immediately recognize, anytime you're gonna take a day off, I'm gonna pay the price. That becomes, hey, you know what? I'm just not going to ask. I'm not going to ask for my time off because I know you're going to pay the price.
Yeah.
Employees in a tough spot.
It is. And in fact, I've heard this from several different nurses, that there's that whole guilt factor of, I don't want to let my teammate down. I don't want to take this certain time off, because I know that if I take this time off, she's going to have to work this time when I'm out, or he's going to have to work this time when I'm out. And so either they do it and they have the guilt, or they don't do it because they have the guilt. And either way, the employee satisfaction is not as high as we would like it to be.
Yeah, without question. I mean, there are jobs obviously where somebody can take that time off and the work stacks up and they do it when they get back. That's one thing. But if it's work that has to be done and you don't have FTEs built into the budget, or you don't have a registry pool to tap into, or it's historically you've used an agency nurse to fill that spot, but now your organization has said, nope, no agency. Again, you are penalizing the people that you're trying to retain. You're penalizing the people that ultimately you're trying to hire, and they're going to be penalized. And you're doing yourself a disservice because the cost of that agency nurse that may be at 1.5 times their FTE, at least you're getting productivity. When that nurse that says, hey, I haven't gotten any time off for my kids, important life events or my own health or whatever, they leave. Now you're paying for an FTE in the form of, recruitment costs and training and onboarding, and you're getting nothing productive out of it.
I want to ask you a question, Jeremy. Maybe you can help me with this. Why don't we see organizations, most organizations, when they're putting these positions out there, you got full-time, you got part-time, you have PRN. I'm curious if we should be coming up with another level, if you will, where maybe it's only like 0.25, something like that. And we just know we can count on this particular person, and that's how you even advertise the position, right? It's like a 0.25. And so it helps to take care of that 15% you're talking about. Why don't we see our organizations doing that, where you're baking it in, where you've got this person that they're going to come in periodically throughout the year. It's not just like a PRN, like as we need you, but literally we know they're going to coming in at these certain times when we know that there's times where we're going to have more PTO requests.
Yeah. There are some organizations that do it. Obviously, with every employee that is on the rolls, there's a cost, even if they're not a benefits accepting employee. There's the cost in terms of tax costs, their Social Security costs, their workers' comp costs. There's everything that kind of goes into that. But I think the biggest sort of resistance is to look at a budget and say, hey, you know what, we've got 3,000 FTEs in this organization, and we've got 4,500 people that occupy those 3,000 FTEs. The 3,000 FTEs might be the right number, but if you got 5,000 instead of 4,500, organizations feel bloated. They feel like, oh man, this doesn't quite feel right. The ratio between FTEs and bodies gets off. And then you go back to, hey, we're only hiring full-timers, we're only hiring half-timers, and we're only hiring registry because there's a little bit of discomfort. I think the other challenge, obviously, to that is finding a way to work those 0.25s or 0.15s. The one day, the 1 day every 2 weeks, where somebody works. It's not always easy to work them into the schedule and into the calendar. Particularly in organizations that have flexible scheduling. But I think it's a practice that should happen more often. And here's why. We've got an aging workforce, particularly in nursing. And those nurses that have immense skills and tremendous knowledge, they don't see an opportunity to go from their current full-time job or their current part-time job into another role within the institution. So they retire. So they get out of nursing entirely, or they go work at a doctor's office that does give them some flexibility. And particularly in the hospital space, we need to figure out a way to retain those nurses, whether it's to do chart reviews, whether it's to pick up one shift every couple of weeks, because they've got all the skills they need to be able to do that and do that effectively. And they're not going to lose their skills so rapidly. It's a way to keep those folks in the workforce, engaged in nursing, so that when you have a pandemic and all of a sudden a huge, portion of your population becomes a traveler or says, hey, I'm not doing this, or becomes COVID positive and can't come to work, you now have a built-in group to tap to say, hey, I know you're only a 0.1 with our organization, but for the next week or 2 or month or 6 months while this pandemic goes on, can we make you a 0.5 or make you a 0.4?
Mhm.
And you've already got a connection. They're already in the system.
Yeah.
They're already trained. They're, their TDAP is still up to date, and they still, they're still good with employee health. They still are on your roll, so you don't have to worry about anything from a tax perspective or rehiring. And you get that ultimate flexibility, and it keeps them engaged in an organization. And I think the industry has failed in many ways by not creating those opportunities and allowing those aging nurses that are likely aging out, not because they're totally frustrated or not because they're not interested in care, but because nursing is an incredibly physical job that has
Yeah.
beaten them up over the course of time, and they just can't do it anymore. Their knees hurt, their backs hurt, and they say, you know what, I'm done. If there was another option, to say, hey, you know what, I can do this once a week, or I can do this once every couple of weeks. I'm going to keep my skills, I'm going to keep my license, and I'm going to stay engaged with an organization that I've likely put a lifetime into, the whole industry would be better off.
Yeah, this is a great key point, because I've actually talked with several nurses who have said that I just can't do the 12-hour shifts anymore. So if there was another thing available, like an 8 or something like that, I could do that, but I can't do the 12s anymore. I can't be on my feet that long, or I can't do. So that's a great point you mentioned. Okay, here's what I'd like to do now, Jeremy, is I'd like to switch over to, now that we're moving back into in-person events. I'm very excited about the upcoming conference, getting a chance to network with some of my fellow HR professionals, healthcare HR professionals, at an in-person event. So I'd like to move the conversation to that. Tell us a little bit about what we can expect there. I'd love to hear about what is kind of some good do's and don'ts when it comes to these types of events, because it's been a while for a lot of us since we've been to some of these. So I'd love to hear your feedback on that. And those in the comments, if you have any do's and don'ts for networking, I'd love to hear it. And I also want to say hello to Joe Giblin. He's coming in. He's watched us many times. He's an RN, so he knows a lot of the stuff we're talking about with the staffing issues. Appreciate you coming in from Oregon, Joe.
Yeah, thank you. So the event, it's April 24th to the 27th of this month. It's in Phoenix. So, if you're in the Midwest or, northern states, and you want to get on a flight and get into some warm weather while it's still pretty miserable and cold. I mean, here in Chicago, it's not snowing yet, but I think tomorrow it's supposed to snow again, even though it's early April. I'd certainly suggest taking advantage of coming down to the conference. In terms of what our conference is all about, this is the first ASHRA conference that we've put on in person now since 2019. So 2020 was obviously canceled and shifted to a virtual event, and 2021 was a virtual event, and we're super excited to be back in person. Our membership and the industry in general has been sort of clamoring for the opportunity to rub elbows. What you can expect in terms of the event, we've got 3 keynote sessions. They're dynamite. The keynote speaker that is opening, or the keynotes speakers that are opening for us, are Jen Arnold and Bill Klein. I think, if you're familiar with them, they're from The Little Couple. It was on TLC, I believe. Jen is a pediatrician. Obviously she's got dwarfism, and, she's had her own challenges with her own, physical experience. She's a cancer survivor and a pediatrician. So, I mean, when you think about her experience and her husband's experience, absolutely, totally healthcare centric. Jen's a great speaker. I've seen her speak. I've seen some of the show. Her husband, Bill, is super engaging, and, I'm excited to have both of them there as our keynotes. Keith Sonderling is from the EEOC, so he's gonna kind of give us a state of the state. And Scott Bloom is a comedian, TV, and media personality, super engaging, super funny. They're going to be dynamite. They're going to kind of, Jen and Bill and Scott are going to bookend the event. But in the middle, we're going to have about 50 or so educational sessions. We've got 3 or 4 different social events during the course of the time. When you think about the event, the best thing you can do is pick sessions that are incredibly important to you, but that you don't have a ton of experience in. if you're going to go to a session on, on sourcing and your job is as a sourcer, you may not get as much out of it as if, you're a sourcer and you're saying, hey, you know what, I'm going to go to an event on data and analytics, or I'm going to take an opportunity to go to an event on leadership development. You may be getting more out of those events than you would the ones that are kind of in your classic wheelhouse that you likely already have a lot of experience in. I think the other thing that is incredibly important to sort of maximize the event is to make sure that you're maximizing the interactions that you have with other attendees. There will be hundreds and hundreds of people at this event, and if not potentially 1,000 people at the event. Say hello, get to know folks, engage, have conversations, tell people where you work. Use the app that we have to help connect with folks. Where there are vendors that are saying, hey, you know what, we're bringing folks out to dinner or taking them to, a ball game or whatever whatever our business partners are doing during the course of the event. Take advantage, get out there. You're likely going to meet somebody that's got a similar experience or similar interests. And you're going to make some friends from around the country that you can bounce an idea off of, ask a question to, come to ASHRA 2023 and say, hey, I'm going with this peer that I met from ASHRA 2022 because they were really engaging and they've become a friend rather than just a colleague. So there's a ton of reasons to be there. I certainly would encourage any of you that can make it. I realize it's only about 16 days out. But if you're not registered, I would suggest trying to make it to the event because it really is a great event and it's healthcare HR centric. So,
yes.
We go to other events. I mean, I go to other events because I'm a professional in HR, but when it comes to the content that is absolutely 100% relevant to my role and the work that I did for 20 plus years, this is the premier event.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was there actually in 2019 in Chicago. Had a great time. I made some key connections. One of them is someone who we both know, which is Jennifer Klein. I met her at the Chicago conference in 2019, and fast forward through the pandemic and what happened shortly after that. She and I started to connect further on the live shows, and she had me go on some of her presentations with some of the associations that she speaks to. And so ever since that point, we've had that connection, and I'm very excited to accept the invitation between herself and Mary over at ASHRA to be on this executive symposium. And actually, one of our clients is going to be on there with us, which I'm very excited about. He's a great HR leader in this space, in the area. His name is Omar Reed. He's going to be on the executive symposium with us. And then someone who I know very well from Dallas, from Parkland system out there, Parkland Health Hospital and Health System in Dallas. She's also going to be on the executive symposium with us as well on, I believe it's that Monday of the conference. But I'm very excited for a lot of different reasons about this conference and being able to reconnect with some of the folks who I've met before, and then to meet new folks there as well.
Yep, absolutely. I mean, that if this were just an educational event, it'd be fine. We would, we'd do it online like we have in the past. And those were incredibly successful, but they don't have the same appeal as being there in person, reading body language, kind of feeding off the energy, feeling the energy in the room when somebody's presenting and everybody's engaged. And then obviously just all those conversations that happen, as you walk out of a session into another one, or out in the lobby, or, you recognize a peer. As a matter of fact, I was on a meeting just earlier today related to a grant that ASHRA's part of. And the person who's the grant holder, or that runs the grant out of Dallas College, she's one of our presenters. And she said, she posted it out on LinkedIn, and she told me today that one of her friends from grad school, somebody that she was somewhat close with, and over the course of years had sort of lost touch with, reached out to her, said, hey, I saw that you're presenting at ASHRA. I'm doing this session in the same room right before you. So they're reconnecting, they're going to be able to go out and have a drink and reconnect and rehash. And there's tons of that goes on. I mean, the first time that I went to the event, ironically enough, I talked with my leaders. I went to the event, and I walk around the corner. There's somebody that works in my office. I didn't even know she was going.
Oh,
I didn't even
wow.
know that somebody in my own space was going to the event, and they said, "Hey, Deb, what are you doing here? Let's go have dinner. Let's enjoy Washington." And it was great. So you're going to run into people that you see every day, and you're going to run into people that you haven't seen in decades, and everything in between, and everybody in between that you don't know would likely want to have a conversation with you, because we're all living the same experience. We're all healthcare HR.
And those who are watching, if you're in healthcare HR and you're very interested in coming to this conference, I was just incredibly honored that ASHRA gave me a few passes to give out. And so if you're very interested in going to this conference, send me a direct message and I'll give you some information on how we can make that happen. Make sure you're there. Okay. And all of you who are thinking about going, I would encourage other colleagues, folks on your team to come too. In fact, one of my clients, we just got him signed up yesterday, but he and a pretty good sized bulk of his leadership team and his HR leadership team are going to come to the conference. And so they're kind of making a thing where all of them are going together, which I think is another great idea. So that you can kind of have some folks that you're familiar with and know and you work with, but at the same time, you get a chance to mix that with, meeting new people, making new connections and getting some new ideas, which we all need more new ideas, do we not?
Yeah, absolutely. And, because there are concurrent sessions going on, you get a couple of peers and you say, hey, you go to that session, I'm going to go to this session. We're going to, we'll review notes and have a conversation afterwards. That's great. That's great to have that energy and be there in person. But, there's also the opportunity. It is something that we record, depending on the type of registration that somebody has, there's always an opportunity to purchase those sessions. And, I think the other thing that's incredibly important, whether you've got a certification from ASHRA or from SHRM or from HRCI, there are 13, 14 CEUs. I don't recall exactly how many CEUs are available by attending the event. But for those of you who, during the course of the pandemic, didn't get to a lot of in-person events, maybe weren't super interested in the virtual events, and now you've got a certification that's potentially going to lapse because you didn't get your CEUs in. This is a chance to come to the event. Obviously, Rallis has got some complimentary registrations available, and come to the event for travel costs and get those CEUs done so that you don't have a lapse.
Well, so I want to thank you, Jeremy. I cannot believe how quickly our time has gone by today. This has flown by. I don't want to leave this session, though, without doing at least one fun question. So would you like a open-ended question or a would you rather question?
I'll take another would you rather. I know we did one of those a couple days ago on a different conversation, and as long as I get to elaborate.
Okay, of course. That's the whole point, right? That's the whole point. Okay. Would you rather, if you had to, by your actions, project the message, I'm an easy mark, or project the message, leave me alone? And guys, in the comments, I want you to answer the same thing. Which one would you pick? And I want to know why. So which one would you pick, Jeremy, and why?
I'd probably go with easy mark.
Okay. Why is that?
I think you can, if you give that perception, even if you feel like people are going to take advantage of you, you've got an opportunity to change the perspective. If you appear standoffish, you appear as though you're not approachable, you never get that opportunity to change a perspective because there is no dialogue, there is no opportunity to expand beyond that. So I'd rather come across as an easy mark and convince somebody that maybe I'm not than have somebody not approach at all.
I love that answer. I feel 100% the same way. Guys, in the comments, what do you guys think? Do you agree with us that we would want to put I'm an easy mark by our actions, or leave me alone? Now, I'm going to respect you if you're on the other side. I just would like to know why it is that you would pick the other side. And guys, also in the comments, if you don't mind, put in there today, what was that resonated with you from the conversation? I already got great feedback from Joe. Thank you, Joe. He says, yes, thank you for the presentation. And I also see that Joanne has put the information about the conference where they can register. They can learn more about the conference. We'll love to see this for you. Oh, Benjamin had a question.
Sure.
He says, is this ASHRA conference just for HR folks, or can others attend? Before you answer that, Hello, Enrique. He says, hello, Ross and Jeremy. Hello back to you. What do you say to that, Jeremy?
I would say this. I mean, obviously, it is an HR-centric event, but based on the fact that not every presentation is completely and totally HR focused. I mean, there are sessions on on data analytics. There are sessions on employee relations that are totally relevant to every single leader, every single potential employee out there. There are sessions on a whole host of topics that, while there is an HR bent to them, the learnings, the information are relevant to anybody who's in a leadership role, anybody that works in healthcare, anybody who wants to see their own career grow, anybody who leads people and wants to become a better leader, anybody who, right now is part of a department that's got an opening and needs to recruit from somebody, or recruit somebody in that, they may not be the recruiter per se, but they may be helping that organization bring in some new talent by having conversations and engaging and understanding what's important to people. It is an HR centric event, but I can tell you that we have healthcare CEOs that come every year. We've got COOs that come every year. We've got CNEs that come every year. We've got business development folks that come every year, and the healthcare continuum, the leaders in the healthcare continuum get a benefit from the event, whether or not they work in healthcare. So if you work in healthcare, or you just feel like, hey, I want to learn a little bit more about myself, about things that are sort of HR centric, but I don't necessarily work in that space, then I think the benefits would certainly outweigh the cost, especially right now when the cost from Rallis is nothing.
Yeah, I will agree with you. And, to me, it's about the connections, right? Making those connections with those folks from different organizations. And they come from all kind of healthcare organizations from all over the country. And on top of that, let's talk about the vendors and the exhibitors. These guys are also from other, sometimes other industries, sometimes other spaces that serve healthcare. Maybe they're from the IT space, or maybe they're a healthcare organization that supports healthcare, something to that effect. But I think there's lots of opportunities for making those connections. I can wholeheartedly recommend this event. It's a great event.
Yeah, I'll tell you, so when about 6 months ago, I guess probably 8 or 9 months ago at this point, I ended up with COVID, like many people did. So it was August. I talked to my boss, COVID positive, I'm going to try and work. I worked. She sent me a really nice gift box, from a company that basically sends soup. So it was a couple of soup bowls, soup, a ladle, the stuff to go with your soup, crackers and all that good stuff.
Love that idea.
And it was a really cool gift. And, I appreciate it, that you kind of recognized the fact that I was sick. And, sure enough, I was at the SHRM event, and there was a person from this organization, and, struck up a conversation, had a great discussion about the fact that, wow, this was such an engaging thing for my boss to do, to sort of recognize the fact that I wasn't feeling well, and that kind of chicken soup is what people want, and sort of the way you feel when you're sick. You're looking for that chicken soup. And we struck up a conversation, and and have stayed in touch since then. So that was something that came from somebody that's not in HR, not in healthcare, but she sent me that opportunity or sent me that soup, and that became an opportunity to have a conversation at an HR event about something that was totally not HR related, but about kind of my own mental health and well-being. And those things happen with our business partners and with those folks that support the event all day long.
That really sums it up. And I know that Benjamin has a background in education in healthcare. So if you definitely reach out to me directly, Benjamin, if you'd like to know more. Guys, thank you in the comments, all your great questions, your interaction. Really appreciate you being a part of our discussion. We're definitely going to be making clips out of this and putting this out. Jeremy, I want to thank you for your time spending it with us today to share your knowledge and your expertise. Thank you for being on the show today.
Thanks for having me, and thank you for the part that you're going to play in making our event successful.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Thanks for my production staff, Joanne and Amanda. Appreciate you guys on the back end. Guys, have a great rest of the day. We'll see you next week. In fact, Monday, we're going to have Jennifer Kleinhans on, Jeremy. We're going to be talking about how we can network better because she's one of the best networking people I ever met. And so we're going to be talking about that on Monday for those of you who want to come back and join us then.
Yeah, you want somebody with a ton of energy and a big personality and, somebody just brightens a room. Jen's that person.
Absolutely. All right. Have a great rest of the day, everyone. Bye, everyone. Stay on for just a second if you don't mind, Jeremy. Bye.
Absolutely.
Tag somebody if